anything
this evening is
to
to
fix
show you my
the problem
work
with the sound.
and
So I am going to say
intermittently,
goodbye.
talk about the project, the way I do my work, and let's say the way anthropology has worked for me
¿Está?
to achieve
Se ha cortado el...
this work. Okay, but before I show you my work, I should probably tell you something about myself. I was born in Ghent, Belgium, and I was a student of photography. Can you hear me? Sorry. Harder. My God. I can't read then. Okay, so I would first like to tell you something about myself and my motivations to become a documentary photographer. I studied, my God, I studied photography in the 80s, and in my small country that was a time of social turmoil and political instability, and on a personal level an awakening sense of idealism. Our political leaders were telling us one thing, and photographers were showing us something else. I can still feel the visceral impact Sebastião Salgado's Sahel photos had on me. So I decided I wanted to do something useful with my photography, and in those days I was in my late teens, early 20s. I wanted to expose social injustice. And well, there were a lot of social abuses to be denounced, and I did so. I covered post-communist Romania, Albania, made several series on Moroccan and Turkish migrant workers, but unfortunately there was no pay in it. And I have 3 children now. I didn't have them then, but yet I was founding a family, and bodies have to be fed. So I turned to editorial and corporate photography. But still the need to do something meaningful with this photography remained, and an opportunity to do so presented itself in 2002 when a former high school friend of Moroccan descent asked me, or say invited me to make a portrait of his father's native village, Timkati, a place of mud and stone in the High Atlas Mountains, say about 60 kilometers north of Agadir. And it's located in the Idautanan region. And like most Westerners invited in such a village, I was, well, I was overwhelmed by the exotic, and as a photographer, I was drawn to it. You know, I was, in no time, I was snapping away at every mule, water-carrying girl, palm tree, shepherd you could see. But, you know, after a couple of days, the fascination for the exotic gave way for, well, a deeper curiosity about the dynamics of the village community, and especially the strong sense of community evident in these mountain people. Now, upon my return home, I think at that time I stayed about 2 weeks. I had my wife and my 2 children with me. Upon my return home, I processed my film, but found I was rather dissatisfied with the results, because they didn't reveal anything I had experienced. You know, this social structure was absolutely missing from the photo. So they merely gave a factual account of my trip, and I realized that if I wanted to render visible something as abstract as, for instance, social organization, I would have to acquire a serious knowledge on an ethnographical level. I would have to understand the subtle dynamics of Berber society, or what some call now Amazigh communities. And my subject, and this is the most important part, I think, my subjects would need to view my photographic approach as respectful, honest, and also my project would have to be properly structured on a collaborative basis. And before I continue, I will first show you the results of the photos I made in Timkati. these aren't the results I threw away. These are the ones I made later on. Okay, enjoy. That's the last one for now. So, in my quest for knowledge, I turned to the classic French ethnographers, who I must admit didn't come easy on me. Robert Montaigne, Jacques Berck, and also Jean Servier. And they proved to be useful as background information and to understand Berber society, but obviously they lack contemporariness. Now, meanwhile, I have read and appreciate specific. And as a result, I hope these 7 photographic case studies will reflect the diversity of rural Berber life in Morocco. Now, over the course of the past decade, I have worked extensively in the Dra and the Dades valleys, the Anti-Atlas, the Western High Atlas, and lately in the Central High Atlas, and I hope to move on to the Middle Atlas and the Rif in the coming years. The next photos I will show you are focused explicitly on habitat and were made in the Dades valleys, in the Dades Valley about the Kasbahs, and the next part will be on the Igudar in the Western High Atlas, Western Anti-Atlas, I'm sorry. Now, in communities much less acquainted with cameras and images, being photographed is considered to be something special, even unique. In contrast to most urban people like us, or in Morocco, most of my subjects have very few photos of themselves, and almost none have been portrayed by a professional photographer. Now, given the oddity of photography in this context, an important element in my work is the quest for an appropriate method to engage the subject. How can I photograph people in a meaningful way? How can I express some sense of their reality, their authenticity? Some colleagues decide to take photos surreptitiously, literally, to take photos in the sense of stealing them. Others hand over the control of the camera entirely to the subject. And they do this to exclude the intervention of the photographer, who is obviously, and I agree with that, culturally and personally biased. Now, the reality, of course, is that the mere presence of a camera and a Westerner changes the behavior of people. I mean, it doesn't matter if someone else makes a picture. It's just the whole process that's there. So I opted for a compromise. For the execution of this work, I decided to use a 4x5-inch field camera. And this is a choice with far-reaching consequences. It's so large and a heavy camera, weighs about 10 kilos, that has to be put on a tripod and manipulated between a black cloth. Now, this means that I have little space to maneuver and that I am very visible. As a result, any improvisation is restricted to a complete minimum. And moreover, exposures with this type of camera limit themselves to one single shot at a time, in contrast to handheld cameras with the repetitive shots, of course. Now, it appears paradoxical, but it's precisely the time-consuming process and the sheer size of the camera that made me choose it. The installation of the equipment and the actual making of the photograph become a ritual and a collaborative process. In this way, the inherently aggressive action of the photographer is often considered much less as an intrusion upon one's private life. And it also, in some sense, the formality of the event matches a certain formality inherent in rural Berber communities. So it really becomes a collaboration between me and my subject. And I should be honest with you, because it's a collaboration between my subject, Abdelkrim Bamou, and myself. I met Abdelkrim in 2003, and after explaining and telling him about my project, and particularly the troubles I had to make myself understood, because unfortunately my tashlit is, like Andrew would put it, wild. And French proved to be less well spread than expected. So initially I engaged him as an interpreter, but very soon he became indispensable on every level of this project. And today I consider him de facto as a co-author of the work we publish. He will be mentioned as an author on the title page of the next book. So our first collaboration took place in Xarti-Sergat in the Dra Valley, where I had been before him, but hadn't been able to do any decent work, leave alone make portraits. People were closed, and much more closed than in the mountainous areas, is my impression. And they obviously didn't trust a photographer who claimed to come and make a portrait of their village. I think they thought I was a spy of some sort. Now, Abdelkrim, he was extremely skilled at explaining the importance of our work, came with me, and with his help, hearts, minds, and doors opened miraculously. And I'll show you the first series we did together. Now, despite all the efforts I did, I was left with the limitations of the photographic image. a viewer would have to know something of Berber life to get what is going on in the pictures, to render the images legible or make them more than pretty images. And I felt textual context would have to be provided, because although images have a profoundly direct impact, they remain frozen moments in time. And text is linear and provides context, both in substance and in time. So, could I do this myself? Possibly. I did so for my first book. But I had learned that it would be too descriptive, too focused on ephemeral knowledge from my limited time in the community. And it would lack authority, of course. So clearly I would have to try and set up a collaboration with an anthropologist interested in the same kind of village ethnography I was working at. And this didn't turn out to be an easy thing. I found out that contemporary ethnography I read was either very theoretical or focused on very specific, for me sometimes obscure details or aspects of Berber life. And it's not that it didn't speak to me, but I couldn't find a lead to my work. So I did try to contact about 50 or 60 anthropologists. So I'm pretty sure some of you who were working in 2005-06 could have gotten an email from me. Yeah, well, now you go like that, but I did get reactions, and they were effusive on good days and condescending on bad days. So I was a bit, well, it was a problem. So finally, well, I remarked, or I got the feeling that photography didn't appear to be a well-liked medium with anthropologists. In 2007, I eventually emailed the American anthropologist David Crawford, whose work I had discovered on his webpage, and I had read it with great joy, and I felt he was the guy I needed. And much to my surprise, he replied to my email within minutes, and I think it didn't take more than an hour for us to agree. We agreed to meet in Marrakesh a couple of weeks later. It was only afterwards that he confessed to me that he actually also hated photographers. And I quote him here: he hated us for sticking cameras in people's faces like machine guns. But he had liked my photos, but more importantly, I think he liked the way I was conducting my work. And to him, that's what he told me, it seemed to have similarities to the way anthropologists conduct field work. And apparently he was also flattered because I had read his work, and not many people do. I can say that because he put this line in here. So once we had met in Marrakech, we became great friends, and we headed for the Agundis Valley, where he introduced me to his friends in Tararist, a high atlas village where he had undertaken his PhD research in 98 to 99, and where he had been returning every year. The idea for a book was born the same evening while looking through my previous work, and from the start we decided that this book should be, or should put text and image in a productive tension with one another, so that the images convey the sensuous texture of the instant, but the text expands this, providing social, historical, and personal context that deepen the engagement with the photo. I returned to the village several times, I think about 6 or 7 times, sometimes with him, sometimes without him. And we stayed in close contact, evaluating the photos and deciding what was missing. So it took us about 5 years to conclude this mission. And I would very much like to show you these photos now. For the text you have to wait another couple of months. But as Davis always says, no one's interested in the text, everyone looks at the pictures. So, this forthcoming book, Nostalgia for the Present, is grounded in these pictures, but the ethnographic commentary accompanying the photos points readers to much they might miss or do miss in the frame. It establishes broader context and deepens the historical background that is impossible to detect from the images alone. The book also provides a commentary on the relationship between image and text, and it explores the difficulty of presenting a traditional place in the midst of profound change. Both photography and ethnographic writing have been critiqued for tending towards static representations. Both seem to portray people in a moment rather than in the complex state of becoming most of us sense in our personal lives. In the introduction, David also explores the use and misuse of photography within an ethnographic fieldwork, from the Orientalist vision of French colonial photographers to Paul Hyman's photo essay for Meaning and Order in Moroccan Society. A photographic contribution critiqued by Vincent Crapanzano as, and I have to read this, an aesthetically sterile photographic essay which fails at once to capture the rich, often contradictory, frequently undramatic quality of Moroccan life and the perceptual and conceptual puzzlement that life produces in the Western observer. Now, I personally don't fully agree with this assessment, and I know David doesn't, but there is some truth in it. Hyman's story is alarmingly similar to mine. He was a fashion photographer who had come to Morocco to visit his boyhood friend Paul Rabinow, who was conducting fieldwork with the Geertzes in Sifru, and Hyman had no ethnographic understanding of his subject, and to some extent made the same inevitable mistake I made more recently. He scratched at the exotic surface without giving a deeper insight into the lives of the people he was portraying. But the greatest defect, from our perspective, mine and David, is not to be looked for in Hyman's work itself, but rather in the fact that the photographic contribution to the book is nowhere linked to the text, and it is kept entirely separate of the writing. Not once is there any interaction between text and image. More so, Hyman isn't even mentioned as one of the authors. This being said, I would like to end with one of the key photos in Nostalgia for the Present and read the text that relates to it, and is a prologue to the book. It's titled Fatima at Home. There are over 100 Ait Benushin family members in Tararist, half of the total village population, and every household has at least one Fatima. The Fatima Ait Benushin pictured here is from the Ait Hussein subsection of the Ushin, one of the poorer branches of that great family. She is standing in front of her father's house. He is Muhammad, son of Omar, son of Hussein, son of Muhammad Ait Yus, the man who became the Ushin. Yus is a Berber version of Joseph. Ushin means jackal. So 5 generations ago, a certain Muhammad began life as a humble member of the Joseph family and left this world more than 100 descendants, the people of the jackal. Even the most enduring things change in time. Fatima lives through the door to her right in the background, along with her father, mother, and some of her sisters. Or more correctly, she lives there sometimes. Like her sisters and father, Fatima takes turns working down in the city. Not only is her section of the Ushin family poor, but her grandfather is still alive. This means that her father has yet to inherit land. Without land, a man cannot form an independent household. Fatima's father and his daughters managed to do this, to have their own household, by working periodically in the city. You can see this in Fatima's urban clothes, de rigueur in 2009. Plain skirt with only a single artful ruffle and an embroidered shirt. These have been purchased new. They are not donated thrift store material from Europe or the United States that is sold by the kilo at the weekly souk. I, that's David, never saw such clothes in 1998 when I lived in Terrorist. Back then, a girl like Fatima would present herself in a stiff tartan skirt over leggings, with multiple tattered tops worn one over the next. She would have accessorized with cheap jewelry, no matter how hard the day's work would promise to be, jangling tin bangles and plastic beads, and she would have had a headscarf tied the country way, with the knot on the forehead rather than round the chin. Like everywhere else, fashions change up in the mountains, not least because girls like Fatima move back and forth from the village to the city, embodying new feminine ideals as they repatriate small amounts of cash. When she is in the village, Fatima wears the necklace of keys that responsible women bear proudly. These show that she is trusted with her family's supplies, with the sugar, barley, spices, and coffee. There are a few valuables in the village. They remain locked in hidden storerooms. Women who hold the keys to these storerooms are central to the smooth functioning of the household, to the whole village order. Men travel to souk to do all the shopping and purchasing, but women control the larder. There are deep complementarities to village life. Everyone has a role with responsibilities, and everyone's role changes over time. Fatima still wears leggings under her skirt, which has long been typical of mountain women. That has not gone out of style, and somehow the bright blue plastic shoes ornamented with a single yellow flower have endured the vicissitudes of fashion. I sometimes wonder if the people in the blue shoe factory in China have any idea what becomes of their handiwork. I wonder if these blue shoes sell anywhere else in the world. Like every mountain girl, Fatima is powerful despite her slight figure. You can see it in her hands. She has thin arms and wrists, frail-looking shoulders, but her palms are broad, her fingers thick, and nested within her skirt are two legs strung with sinews like steel cables. Fatima can do more than walk up and down a mountain bearing loads larger than she is. She can run with them, racing with her cousins and girlfriends, trilling songs at the same time. Sometimes these songs have delightfully mischievous lyrics. The trails outside the village are where the girls temporarily escape the weight of village propriety, the formal social mores of their elders. The little alley where Fatima stands is in the upper part of the village, off of the main tunnel leading out of the Atharach, a village square, and end up to the fields above the village. It is not a part of Terrorist I know very well, despite the fact that the place is quite small. Villages are surprisingly complicated places. I live below this section, next to the road, among the most powerful members of the Ait Ali section of the Benushin. Up here, with Fatima, are the cousins of the Ait Ali, and sometime opponents, the Ait Hussein and Ait al-Hajj lineages. This section is also the home of the poorer members of the separate Idzdo lineage. These poorer Idzdo are cramped together in the building to Fatima's left, behind her, beyond the little rock wall that encloses a cattle pen, sometimes used as a toilet. It is a long and complicated story why some households have land and some do not, why some are politically powerful despite the egalitarian ideals of the village. I, and that would be David again, wrote a whole book about these dynamics, but there is not a particularly wide audience for the esoterica of a village economy. The simplest explanation is that powerful families with many children eventually must divide their property among their heirs. The Quran specifies just how, and over time plots get smaller and smaller, and names that had been big or imkur begin to slip into penury. Small, weak families can slowly climb into respectability if they work hard and marry well. Especially these days, if one or more members secures a lucrative job in the city. You would never hear anyone brag about their wealth, not within earshot of their fellows. The stories of families rising and falling are known by everyone, whispered in the alleyways and behind doors, but rarely stated in public. That would be shameful. People take great care to disguise their financial situation, whether poor or more comfortable. But everyone knows that behind the imperturbable walls of the houses, fates are written quite differently. If the slow migration of land into and out of families has always led fortunes to change, migration for wage labor has accelerated the process, rocketing some families up the social ladder, if a member lands a good job, and dropping others into misfortune as sons and daughters abandon the village for the cities and stop supporting their households. Girls like Fatima labor in the city, gaining knowledge and skills, learning Arabic along with tough lessons about life amongst urban strangers. The depredations girls suffer, the abuse, and the sadness of being forced out of their natal village, all of this is transformed into assets for their families, or for some of them at least. These days, the tables can turn quickly. In 2004, I had tea with Fatima's father, Mohammed, in the little room behind her. He proudly showed me his new television and the video disc player attached to it. He told me of a particular brand of solar power panel that ran the machines, the wattage, the voltage, or something I could not quite grasp. Then he put in a disc, a film of his older daughter's wedding. She had worked in the city and met a husband there. For the event, Mohammed had rented a tent and set it right in the path of the upper part of the village. Where else would you put a tent? There are no flat spots in these mountains. He had hired dancers, professional singers, and served a great feast to all willing to come. He had even contracted a video recording crew to make the film we were watching. Mohammed's poverty and his long-lived father holding on to the family land had forced the young man to the city in a bid for independence, and the city had secured it, had allowed him to transform his world. The pain of separation, of leaving his family and his wife, of sending his girls to work in the houses of strangers, this had not been in vain, not finally. It took time and sacrifice, but now Mohammed struggled to contain his pride as he displayed the fruits of his children's hard work to his more high-handed relatives back home, especially the ones who had not very subtly questioned his manliness for allowing his daughters to go to work for cash. Mohammed had the hovering images on the television to savor, moving pictures of the guests, the more powerful members of his extended family, and especially the old men crammed together and bedazzled, drinking his tea in his tent in an awe-inspiring city-style festival imported into the very heart of the village. And little Fatima had been key to it. Her wages, her years of grueling labor, secured this spectacular marriage for the older sister. Who knows whether Fatima's sacrifice will be further rewarded in this world or the next? Who knows whether Fatima herself will marry, will come to have a spectacular wedding and a life caring for her own children instead of those she is hired to nurture. Her face seems haunted by such questions. 1,000 generations of mountain girls have known with some certainty how they would spend their days, where they would work, what they would do, the walls in which they would die. For this generation, the future has been wrenched open wide. A terrifying chasm of possibilities stretches wide open for Fatima. So I get a bit emotional with this picture. This is the end. Characteristically stoic, with her family's needs pressing, Fatima walks determinedly forward into uncertain times. I thank you very much. Wait. And you must all think I'm a very rude person for not thanking Araceli and Leila before my speech, but since I'm the last one to speak here, I would like to give them a big applause for this organization, and personally for me, for making all the practical arrangements to get me here and to get acquainted with all these wonderful people. Thank you.
Bien, si alguien quiere hacerle alguna pregunta, cuestión, Pablo.
I just
Yes.
And I just wanted to say that I'm very, very happy to know the whole context of your work. It's fantastic photographers. More often than like an anthropologist wouldn't reject photographers. So, first of all, bravo for the evolution and the deepening in the field. I like to say, I made a jest when you were saying, I contacted about 50, 60 anthropologists. Among some of you maybe were within my email addresses. I wasn't, and my jest was because I was working on the film in 2005 and 2006 looking for a photographer.
Really? Well.
I really missed you, man.
Well, Hassan told me yesterday, you should not ask. You have to let it come to you. So I should have waited maybe.
I was also hoping something like that, and okay.
But the good thing is, and I would like to take the opportunity that I will start work in the Middle Atlas and in the Rif Mountains, and I've noticed there are a lot of people working in the Rif, and I'm looking for a good entry there.
Yeah.
So anyone who
Absolutely, this type of congresses
well,
help.
that's an interesting thing you say, because the first reaction actually I got from David was, why not urban Berbers? And that would be very, well, I'm a bit. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I fully agree, but you know, I have to keep my focus a bit.
So the thing that I wanted to say, to ask, the concrete question is that then, well, through that process, I ended up collaborating with another photographer. At the same time, I was filming a documentary that I finalized, and this photographer got at the same time the reportage in Jardin du Maroc, a photographic reportage that I accompanied by text. And me myself tried to, so while filming, also tried to photograph locally. And what I found, and that is contrast to what you, methodologically speaking, when you put the camera in front of the people, I had even being anthropologist and being longer than you in the field, I always had problems with taking the images. Basically, I would only wait at the beginning. Of course, I tried. I saw it didn't work. So it's not good for an anthropologist to force things, obviously. And then I waited until they come up. And then some situations came up, and I used them. Of course, you can do that, because after 8 years going in and out of the field, then of course situations come up that you can make a photo for. But I always asked myself, and this maybe you can answer best, of course, but anybody else who has experience, how did others do to make photographs, to go 2 weeks on the field and get these marvelous photographs without getting, stones thrown on you? I mean, I go to the Atlas, to the High Atlas, since 1999, I think. No, 1997, and I was 18 then, and I remember just taking some pictures in general, and in the Raraya, I was, almost like insulted. They're already used to tourism, so there's an abuse. But then when I went on to the Yagur, there was not much tourism around. I was a person known and well received in the community. I still had problems. So how did you do, even if you go through anthropologists, it is aggressive in some way, you know, to go up and photograph the people. I mean, and all the photos that you have to do, not just asking for a favor. I mean, they pose for you. So the problem that I found was the authenticity of the image. These are poses. I understand you're going to answer me better, but what I'm imagining is that you ask, and then they, after knowing you or with a person that puts you in, they pose for you. But the quotidianité, c'est le plus difficile. Et c'est ça que un anthropologue souvent cherche le plus, non?
Yeah. Well, how do I do it? First of all, I'm a photographer, not an ethnographer. Well, it's a limited time, but for example, let's stick with the example of no, not terrorist, because there I was introduced by David, so I had some authority. Xartisergat, for example, I knew no one, and the first time I went there, I went there for 3 days, and that didn't work good. The second time I went with my colleague Abdul Krim, and what I do normally, I go there and I talk to people. I mean, you seem to be a very nice guy, but if you're nice to people, if you talk to people, if you show interest in what they do, they will show interest in what you do. And the idea is that I ask people to stand there and to do, no, it doesn't work like that. It's a collaboration from start to finish. And taking a photograph takes about 3 hours. And the first 2 hours is just drinking tea and making chit-chat and talking and what I always have with me, I have chickens at home, I have an orchard at home, I have walnuts, very important. And before I go, I take pictures of my family, I take pictures of my garden, I take pictures of how I slaughter my own chicken. And I mean, that creates a bond. They see, well, he is from Europe, but actually he's just like us. So my basic advice, if you want to do something like this, is be nice to people. I mean, portrait photography is not about photography. It has nothing to do with photography. I mean, anyone can do this. I mean, if you have an eye for the light, you can do this. Portrait photography is about social interaction. Talking with people, making friends with people. I mean, you don't want to be photographed by some machine. It's a person. Oh. So there has to be a relation. That's why, for example, just to continue this, because I hate photo books with captions like Berber woman in Skura. I mean, what is that? That's not a Berber woman. That's Fatima Eid Ben Moro. These are persons. And that's the way you should try to do it. Interaction. Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, Amy.
First, I want to thank you for the experience of this. It was very moving for me.
Yeah, for me too.
I was moved by your photos anyway, but then to have the experience of you talking us through this photo and really seeing every detail of her life, it made me kind of overcome too. I understand how it's hard for you to say it. It really did make her a human being, like you just said. And I have a follow-up question perhaps to what you just said, which is about part of what we do as anthropologists that it seems you've done as well is sort of showing people themselves through another lens, and it's such an unusual, unique process to say to people, you know, this is what your life means, and this is how we see your life, and this is how we analyze your life. So I wondered if you could tell us about that part of your experience too, when you show them the photographs or show them the book or talk them through what you're doing and how they how they react to seeing themselves through your lens, literally.
Well, first of all, they're always disappointed because it's in black and white. It's old-fashioned. So, but more interestingly is that, well, we regard books and photographs as kind of precious items. I mean, a book, you're careful with it, but if I take my book up to the village, within 2 hours, it's like a second hand book. I mean, they grab it like they grab their shovels. So there is no tactility with this kind of thing. Also with photos, if I distribute my photos afterwards, it always makes my heart tick to go like that. But that's just the practical side. What's more interesting is that they are never looking at the persons. They don't say, okay, this is Fatima Ait Benouchen. No, this photo is made in the upper part of the village, in the small road there, leading up to the Idzo section. So they are so focused on place and only secondary in the person in the picture. For example, if you show them photos of barley growing, they can say, oh yeah, that was in 2008, and in 2008 we had a very good crop, good harvest. And it's well, that's also something extremely particular, and also why I put the names of the owners of the houses with the photos, is that everything has a name. So they're always looking for geographical places. A stone is not a stone. It's, you know, it's the stone that's lying just 3 meters from the small walnut tree. So they're not acquainted with looking at photos, and they don't treat them like we do, and they read them entirely different. Yeah.
Okay, Hassan, do you want to know? No, it's...
About collaboration, they used to see photos in colors, and you're authoritarian to turn them into black and white.
I actually don't turn them into black and white. I'm actually, I am old-fashioned. I work on negative, on 4x5 inch sheet film, and well, the reason why I work in black and white is double, because on one hand, for me as a photographer, it forces me to work with light, to work with texture, to work with shadow, and the nuances between black, gray, and white. So it's very challenging as a photographer. I don't work in color because color is so extremely distracting in a colorful country like Morocco. So I think it's most efficient to point the reader or the viewer to what I think is essential in the image by showing it in black and white. And then a more prosaic reason, because I print my work myself, and I just love working in the darkroom. It's like Ansel Adams, he said, the negative is the partiture, and the execution is the print. So, maybe to close it up, this does great injustice to my photos. You should see them in print, silver gelatin prints. Thank you very much.
Ok, de las cuestiones, Amina quiere hacer una pregunta.
Pues yo tenía los comentarios en español, pero je vais essayer de dire ça en français.
En français, c'est parfait. Hein. Pas l'espagnol, s'il vous plaît.
Bon, premièrement, pour moi, l'ethnographie visuelle, son anthropologie, ça reste un peu un travail, pardon pour le concept handicapé, parce que pour moi, l'anthropologie et l'ethnographie visuelle sont un couple d'amoureux, una pareja de enamorados. Parce qu'actuellement, on ne peut pas parler d'une anthropologie sans image, parce que l'image, parfois, exprime la réalité d'une manière plus profonde. Mais je trouve que tu as de beaux yeux, parce que tu as vraiment nous apporté de belles photos. Mais moi, je me rappelle un travail qui est fait au Mexique par un anthropologue australien sur un musée de photographie, Museo de Fotografías. Il a donné des appareils aux populations et je pose la question parce que tu as 3 générations, des jeunes et des adultes et la 3e génération et vraiment sera un travail ethnographique important. Et je me pose la question parce que je connais très bien la région et je suis marocaine d'origine. Il y a vraiment des thèmes, par exemple le rituel, les pratiques, les tatouages, le tatouage, oui. On a un travail très important qui a fait Westermarck et la signification des habits dans la société oasicienne. Quand la femme elle porte le bleu, signifie qu'elle est encore célibataire, quand elle prend le noir. Et je me pose la question sur la signification des joyas. Les bijoux, il y a des bijoux qui se portent pour la signification qu'elle est en période de divorce. Quand il quitte le premier significat, il leur reste 2 mois. Et je me pose la question sur la photo des souks simanal, souks de la semaine. Et quand tu as porté des photos sur l'Qsar, il y a une signification de chaque espace. Pour cette raison, je me pose la question sur la lecture des images et l'analyse ethnographique. Et ça, c'est un appel d'un travail en collaboration avec un anthropologue, mais c'est un travail admirable.
Merci. I would like to react to... je veux réagir à 2 choses. Alors, la dernière que vous avez dit, c'est vrai. Les photos... ils ont besoin de texte. Parce que c'est trop dur. Vous êtes tous anthropologues, mais si tu n'es pas anthropologue, même si tu ne connais pas la région, c'est impossible à lire les photos. Donc c'est pour ça que j'ai monté cette collaboration. 2, l'importance de la photographie dans l'ethnographie. I dare you. Tu me montres des ethnographies modernes avec plus de 20 photos. Ça n'existe presque pas. Ça n'existe presque pas. My feeling is that most ethnographers are a bit inhibited not to show photographs. I just got a book from Monsieur Hassan ici. Il y a 3 ou 4 photos. Oui, mais non, tandis que dans le passé, je mentionne Argonauts of the Western Pacific, Malinowski, c'était 70 photos. Hein. Donc, dans le passé, il y avait plein de photos dans les ethnographies et ça a diminué. Moi, non, c'est pas vrai, parce que maintenant, dans les ethnographies, il y a des photos, ils sont en noir et blanc, et c'est plutôt pour s'excuser un peu.
Je suis désolée de couper cette conversation, c'est intéressant. I think that the great problem of this conference is evidently at this point the time and maybe the organization, not the time. And